Welcome to the Awakened Anesthetist podcast. I'm your host, Mary Roberts. I'm a certified anesthesiologist assistant living and working outside of Kansas City, Missouri. I created this podcast to give CAAs across the nation a place to come together and awaken to our profession's unique ability to create a life by design rather than default. That process can start by simply listening and engaging with this podcast. By doing so, you're already changing what's possible for CAAs, for you, for me, for all of us. I'm so thankful you're here. Let's jump into this episode and see what we can do together. Before we jump into this episode, I wanted to take a minute and invite you all, the listeners, into the Awakened Anesthetist community. This is a community of like-minded individuals. It is intended for CAAs who are retired or practicing. It's intended for CAA students or prospective CAA students. And you can also join if you're a non-CAA anesthesia provider. There is a way to join in the show notes and kind of denote which of those options you are. And so you can get resources that are really targeted to you and what you care about. I know that when I was looking for help and guidance, a lot of voices were out in that space of designing your life and chasing your dreams and sort of renegotiating your priorities, but they were all spoken to me from a voice that really didn't sound like mine. Even when I was listening to CRNAs talk about what they had done and what it took, or anesthesiologists to share their stories, it still felt like there was a disconnect between their lived reality and mine as a CAA. And so I knew that starting a community of like-minded individuals designed for CAAs, specifically for the issues that we care about and the way our lives look and are structured, and the great benefits and also the limitations of our profession are understood amongst us so that we don't always have to be explaining ourselves or doubling back to resynthesize information that was really meant for a PA or a CRNA. And so I'm really hopeful that this community can connect us all on a deeper level. Every month, I'm going to send out a newsletter that's going to include a way to connect with each other, resources that are targeted to our profession and us as individuals, and then ways to make change that hopefully will move us all along our unique journey towards our life by design, which is really important to me and to the point of this podcast and why I started it. I know how powerful our CAA profession can be in creating a life by design, and I really want to share that message and share our stories with each other so that we can all move along that path. So if you're interested in joining the Awakened Anesthetist community, you can find a link in the show notes on whatever podcast platform you're listening to now. If you're a member of the Awakened Anesthetist community, you're also going to be the first one to get details about things like future guests. If I want to poll the audience to get questions to ask that guest, or to hear what topics you guys want covered in upcoming podcast episodes or newsletters, I am going to go to you all as the resource to create this content that is going to serve us best. I do have some exciting news that in the spring of 2023, there will be a live Awakened Anesthetist podcast recording, and those details will also be given to the Awakened Anesthetist community first. And I'm really excited to share some more of those details once we pin down a few more specifics. I think it's going to be really expansive, and I'm excited to share really the magic of podcasting with you all live. So if you're interested in getting those details, again, you can sign up for the Awakened Anesthetist community in the quick link you will find in the show notes. All right, let's get on to this episode. Hello, Awakened Anesthetist community. This is your host, Mary Jean. I am back to share the third and final installment of that 3-part process series that I started last year. It is my journey to finding my dream part-time 2-day-a-week job with health insurance. I left the story back in July of 2022 with part 2 of this 3-part series. And at the end of that episode, I had just quit my full-time job of 11 years. And actually, back when I recorded part 2, I was still fairly close to the events that I will share here in this grand finale. And as you can tell by the title of this process episode, it was kind of a big life event. I just wanted some more distance from that experience because, a lot of podcasters, in the community of like podcasting the business say you should only share your story from your scars and not from your wounds, basically give some distance from the really intense emotional reaction that you have when something big happens to you. And you can get a little bit more of a full spectrum perspective, a full spectrum story that you can then share. So, spoiler alert, if you read the title of this episode, then yes, I was in fact fired from that 3-day-a-week part-time job, that job that I took right as I quit my 11-year full-time employment. And if the details of that first part of my journey feel a little fuzzy, or if you've never heard them at all, if you're new to the Awakened Anesthetist, welcome. And I suggest that you go back and listen to episodes 9 and 10, which are the first two parts of my process series of going from a full-time job to part-time job. And in part 1 and part 2, I give you a very detailed description of everything I went through to be able to find my dream job. And, I share what it took in terms of money, in terms of negotiations, what I had to save personally, what I had to pay off personally in order to be able to quit or feel like I could quit. And then most importantly, at least for me in my journey, I think it gives a real sense of how long it took for me to realize my dream. And after listening to those podcast episodes, I think you're going to get a really good sense of who I am and my backstory and my journey that ultimately did lead me to start this podcast. So I highly recommend going back to listen to those process episodes, and then you should meet us back here when you are done. Okay, so for the rest of us who are here to hear my part 3, let me just bring you up to speed on the events leading up to me getting fired from that 3-day-a-week part-time job. After I had left my full-time job, which was in August of 2019, I basically had immediately started that 3-day-a-week surgery center position, really just a few days later. And the transition in terms of timing and in terms of like being welcomed warmly by the group, that all went super smooth. I was the first CAA that they had ever hired, and really everything went well. I was kind of embraced by the surgery center team, the nurses, surgeons. They really were very welcoming. However, the actual transition to give anesthesia at a completely different place for a completely different anesthesia group was much, much harder than I had expected. And when I look back now, I can see that I was just mentally exhausted and totally overwhelmed. And it was from all of the changes. I had really been at only one place professionally. And of course, I had gone different places in my training, but I had been so indoctrinated, ingrained with the way things were always done at my first long-term employment that all of the new just sent me through the ringer, really. It was little stuff like all the new names, not knowing anyone's names, their new charting system, all the new surgeons, their preferences, how long everything takes for XYZ surgeon to close or to come into the room. I had to make all new friends, which was a very different and uncomfortable situation that I had never really been in for the past 11 plus years. And, all that sort of awkward break room, lunchroom banter and the little dance you kind of have to do as the new girl just to meet people and be nice and make friends. Like, I wanted to do it, but it just totally taxed me. And then on top of that mental exhaustion, I actually was dealing with a real loss of my identity. And that was completely unexpected. In my mind, I had been an anesthetist who could do all of these really complicated anesthetics, and I could function in a really high-pressure environment and perform. And I never realized how much of my own self-worth as a human being I had placed on that aspect of my work. And so this transition away from full-time work to a part-time schedule, while it was a dream come true, it really threw me off, and I was struggling with who I was now and what it meant to be a non-full-time worker. Like, I wasn't a full anesthetist or something. It really was hard for me to grasp who I was now, that I wasn't always giving anesthesia. And it was just wild. It took me much longer than anticipated to find my footing. I would say it was a good 6 months before I could really feel content with my decision. And the truly bizarre part was that after I had kind of gotten through all of the mental exhaustion and the newness wasn't wearing me out every day, I kind of knew where things were and knew people's names. I could tell that I was genuinely happy. Like the reasons why I had wanted to go part-time were actually making me happy. I was no longer missing dinners. I got to pick my kids up from school at 3:45, even on the days that I worked. I had energy after work to work out, or I could get up early in the morning and work out because I wasn't so exhausted from pushing myself as hard as I had been. And I had energy to play with my kids, to make dinner. Like largely everything that I wanted came true and was making me happy. But there was this voice in the back of my head that just wouldn't let me be in complete peace. And I did a lot of work with that voice and that discontentment. And I wasn't shy at all about telling people who I love that I was struggling with this like discontentment. And, I could tell that I was happy, but I could also feel really uncomfortable with some, of like who I was and my self-worth. And eventually I had enough conversations and positive reinforcement and enough understanding of what that voice really was that the voice got quieter and quieter. Of course, I have like tons to say on what that voice really was, my cultural conditioning as a working mother, my perfectionism, the patriarchy, things that we're not going to get into here, but it was real. And it took me a long time to make peace with the idea of not pushing myself to my absolute limits. Like it was okay to slow down and rest. And that is, of course, what I wanted. But then when I actually had it, it took my body and mind a while to adjust to that. And I just had never heard anyone say that before. It was totally unexpected. And I feel like when you talk about things like going from full-time to part-time, of course, there's so many good things about it. And no one, everyone's wanting to give you the highlights. No one's really wanting to give you maybe the struggle of it as well. And so I just wanted to put that in here, and maybe you can relate, or maybe you will relate in the future if you're in a similar situation. But I just wanted to say that giving anesthesia is such a fulfilling career, and we can get so much of our own personal fulfillment and self-worth. And that is beautiful. That's wonderful. That's one of the things I love most about the profession. And also, I had to start cultivating other things that made me worthy in my own mind, that it wasn't just about giving anesthesia. And that took time and practice and, a whole bunch of personal growth. Okay, so let's kind of fast forward, blah, 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 8 months COVID. Unfortunately, it was not just like that. And you guys are all in healthcare or are healthcare adjacent. And so that the COVID pandemic really hit kind of hard in the spring of 2020, especially in hospitals and healthcare settings. And I, like all healthcare workers, was hit by COVID in terms of how it changed, almost everything about the way we work. But I was protected from a lot of the trauma of being in healthcare at that time because I did work at an elective surgery center, meaning there were no emergent cases. You had to be, before there wasn't testing, but when testing came out, we absolutely only did surgeries if you were tested. Like there were some barriers, so I didn't get that close to really the trauma, honestly, of being in healthcare during COVID. And I'm not going to really get into the specifics of the way that COVID impacted my work and, what that job turned into or looked like during the pandemic. But I do want to mention that I was employed at the surgery center by a small private anesthesia group, which is a totally different beast than being employed by a large hospital system or group. And COVID had, of course, significantly impacted their revenue. For 2020, 2021, the case numbers were down overall. And however they expected 2020 and 2021 to work out revenue-wise was not what happened. It was vastly different. And so I don't really have all of those details, and I don't want to be on here speculating. But one random Thursday afternoon in May of 2021, I saw our anesthesia group president walk into my surgery center, and he was in a button-down shirt and slacks on a day that he was not even supposed to be present at the surgery center. And, to have him walk in dressed up, like I saw him and it just felt weird. Like it just felt off. And it was also, 2 p.m. or something. It was like in the afternoon. It was in the morning, but I just figured he was there for a meeting. So we continued working. The last case finished maybe around 2:30 or 3. And we were told, I don't even remember by who, but that the president of our group wanted to have a meeting with the 3 anesthetists who work at the surgery center. So there were 3 CAAs employed by this private anesthesia group, and then the rest of the coverage was anesthesiologists only. So it was docs and CAAs working at this surgery center together, all in one group. So after that last case finished, the 3 CAAs, including myself, were kind of escorted into this meeting with our president. And I don't know how your hospital works or your anesthesia department, but every single anesthesia meeting that I have ever been called into never occurs in an office. I don't understand what this is all about, because obviously some of these meetings are very important and they always seem to be like in a supply closet or just out in the open in the OR hallway, like around a corner, like no one can hear you, like you're having these big intense conversations. So I don't know if that's specific just to my experience or if you guys can relate, but we were ushered into the 23-hour room, which, is like a longer term stay room at a surgery center where no one stays for a very long time. And so it was hardly ever used, largely used for supplies or like a hidey hole if people on staff wanted to go eat their lunch, because there's a TV in there and it was like a little bit more of a quiet space. So we were told to go into there for the meeting, and the president of our group was in there. He was visibly uncomfortable. It was like obvious that something big was about to be shared. He was like kind of standoffish. He was like trying to make light of the situation. I don't know. It just felt really like I became nervous, and I had not been nervous up to that point. And so the quick version of what he said is that the anesthesia group, his anesthesia group, who employed myself and the other 2 CAAs, would not be renewing their contract with the surgery center where we all worked. And they were going to shrink their practice to only serve the other contract location that they had, which was more of like a regional city hospital that was like 45 minutes away from where the surgery center was. And then he proceeded to tell us that he already knew that the group would not be taking us, meaning the 3 CAAs, with them when they left. So basically in 90 days, when the termination clause would finish, that anesthesia group of docs would pull out of the surgery center and leave us without employment. Our boss, this anesthesiologist, gave lots of reasons why they couldn't or he wouldn't or couldn't take us with them, and most of the reasons were pretty understandable. But the moral of the story was that they were leaving us without employment in 3 months. And we were, for lack of a better word, fired. And when he finished saying his part, I remember being just in this numb shock, out of body like state. I think I almost started laughing. Like it just felt so surreal. I felt like I was watching this bad movie or something. I just couldn't quite grasp the moment. It felt very out of body. I, of course, had heard of people losing their jobs before, particularly when like a big national anesthesia company comes in and buys out a smaller group or something, or the hospital thinks they're saving money. I just had never considered that would ever happen to me, or that something similar to that would ever happen to me. The group that I worked for was functioning really, really well. We were all happy. The surgery center functioned perfectly. And, of course, caseload was down because of COVID, but that's kind of everywhere. And I certainly don't understand still to this day why exactly they decided to leave. But I do know that it was money related. And the other thing is that I don't let myself ruminate or get too anxious about why they didn't take the CAAs with them to their other facility. The other facility happens to be all CRNAs and docs. And of course, there does seem to be something there where the CAAs weren't welcome, or They didn't want to go through the trouble again of getting us added onto their bylaws. I mean, there's just so many reasons why that could have been. And it also could have been just because they didn't have the space to hire us, which was one of the reasons that the president gave to us, is that they just didn't have a need for more anesthetists, CRNAs, or CAAs at the other hospital. So who exactly knows, but we had been fired. And now we had this 90-day ticking time bomb to find another job or somehow miraculously find an anesthesia group that was going to come in and take over the anesthesia at the surgery center and then also hire us. Or there'd be some sort of like contract company coming in or a local CRNA group. And so there were just a ton of unknowns. The next 3 weeks in particular, there was just tons of questions and posturing and making phone calls and Google searching. I had kind of landed on the idea that I would probably have to start working locums, like maybe in Florida. I'd work a week in Florida away from my family, stay down there, and then maybe come home for 3 weeks and do that 12 times or something. I was kind of coming up with all these different scenarios. The one good thing that I did know that made this process a lot more comfortable is that because I had been fired during the era of COVID, the federal government had granted a protection or a support clause into the COBRA coverage. COBRA is the insurance coverage that you are granted. I think it kind of depends, but it's usually around 15 to 18 months after you are fired or you leave your job. You can still buy into the full premium. You have to pay the entire premium, but you can still get your group insurance. They don't like boot you out of the group insurance if you can pay. And because of COVID, the federal government was covering everyone's COBRA premium. So basically, I would have free healthcare coverage until the federal government decided not to cover that anymore. And so I was researching all of that, looking into my options. I had already, of course, done so much of this work, thinking before, like in 2018, 2019, I thought maybe I'd have to work locums. I thought I'd have to get insurance on the marketplace. And the other major win for me was that I still had my emergency fund. I knew that my family could survive on that emergency fund for 3 to 6 months, really depending on how frugal we became. And so after the dust of being fired and the news settled, and we all kind of adjusted and coped and we're like, okay, now we have to figure out what's next. I can honestly say that I was not super fearful. I wasn't super scared. I just had this gut feeling that I was in a position with enough cards and chips in my favor that I wasn't going to get stuck doing something I absolutely didn't want to do for long. And I know that sounds maybe kind of crazy, but I had done so much work on myself and my self-worth and my mental and financial health. I knew that I could always work PRN because I had looked into it at one of these local city hospitals that just one of those places that always kind of needs PRN help. I knew I could work there if I absolutely had no other options. And I had basically been preparing for this moment for years. I knew how to make steps forward without fear. I knew how to put myself out there and expand my idea of what work, quote, work could look like. I knew I could afford health insurance because of COBRA and because of our emergency fund if the COBRA thing changed. And then around the 3-week mark into our 90-day ticking time bomb, basically, we started to hear rumblings that the local area hospital next to my surgery center, so it wasn't really affiliated with my surgery center, but it was in the same city and it was like 3 blocks away. That hospital was looking at staffing anesthesia at our surgery center. So they're basically going to buy up the practice. And it began to sound like myself and my 2 other CAA colleagues would get a chance to be hired by this potential new management. And I was, of course, interested in pursuing this option, but it seemed too easy and it seemed too quick. Like, I just was really skeptical for some reason that this was going to work out. Like, of all the possibilities, this seemed the least likely to work out. This city hospital had less than 90 days to hire 3 CAAs, which they had never hired before. So I knew that they had to change their bylaws. They also had like 15 plus CRNAs at their hospital that they would have to, contend with as they hire this new provider, this new type of provider. And stereotypically, CRNAs generally are not in favor of CAAs being hired, and that was the case in our situation. And so it just felt like, yes, I'm going to pursue this. Yes, I'm going to speak to this new group, but I just don't see this happening. Well, the time did come for me to interview with that new group. It was about halfway through, 45 days into our 90-day period. And by the time it came around to interview with them, I knew exactly what I wanted. I knew exactly why I wanted it, and I knew what my backup options would be. I had all of my safety nets in place. And so the moment came and they asked me what I was looking for, and I just honestly told them. It was very short and sweet. I want 2 days a week. I want to be part of your group family insurance, and I don't care what 2 days a week those are, but I only want to work 2 days a week. And even to say that out loud, even though I had rehearsed that so many times in my head, to say it out loud to this group felt really far-fetched. I mean, I just had never heard of anyone working 2 days and still getting insurance, particularly anesthesia. I don't know. Have you heard of anyone that happening to anyone? I just didn't know that could be possible, but I knew that was exactly what I most wanted. I also knew that they needed me, and they needed me to be a quick yes to be hired on. And they knew that I needed them, that would be probably easiest for me if they could hire me. So we both played some of our cards, and I think honestly that we both got what we wanted. That hospital group did end up hiring me. They did initially offer me 3 days a week and insurance, and I declined that offer and countered with my true desire, which was 2 days a week with insurance. And they agreed and hired me at that. I did sign with them a few weeks later, and somehow, miraculously, they were able to get us all credentialed. They were able to get the bylaws changed for the hospital in order to be able to hire CAAs. And the transition out of my private group into this larger hospital group at 90 days did happen, and it happened fairly seamlessly. Of course, it wasn't all rainbows and sunshine. There were tons of speed bumps and parts where they were kind of playing hardball with us, or I was trying to get something more specific out of them, like when I had to decline that 3-day-a-week offer. But I just had this deep trust throughout this whole experience that I knew I was going to be safe, and it gave me the strength to really push for what I wanted and to not back down. Currently, I am still working for that hospital group. I have worked for over a year for that hospital group, as well as my 2 other CAA colleagues. They were hired by that hospital group as well. And we've also hired a 4th anesthetist, a CRNA, who has fit in beautifully with our group. She is a wonderful, wonderful person. And as far as I can tell, everything is going fine. I have a 3-year contract with them, which now I'm, a year and change into. I am still working the 2-day-a-week. They provide me with my family health insurance. That health insurance premium is about $100 higher than I was paying with that first private anesthesia group that was hired me for part-time. But this new, bigger hospital group, they're able to offer, extended sick leave and disability insurance, even to their part-time employees, just because they're such a bigger group. And I don't see myself leaving this group for a while. I'm really happy. But I also know that things can change and that they can change pretty quickly. And that would be okay too. I know that I'll be okay. I am pursuing a new locums opportunity just in my city a few times a month, kind of getting my feet wet into that locums world. And I also just renewed my Florida anesthesia license, which I had obtained about 1.5 years ago. It came up for renewal. And so I've got another 2 years of that being an option if any time in my future I think maybe I want to work locums in Florida. But besides that, I know deep down that right now I am content, I am satisfied, I am happy. And for me right now, this is enough. I hope you enjoyed this final installment of the process of going from full-time to part-time, and then within that process, getting fired and really finding my path to my true dream job, which is 2 days a week with family health insurance. I hope it's expansive to you and encourages you that your dreams are possible, that the life you want is within reach. It just may take some time and really a negotiation of what's important to you. And for me, that's an emphasis on how I want to feel as opposed to what I want to have. If you liked this conversation and want to hear more like it, please leave the Awakened Anesthetist podcast a rating, and you can also write a little review that helps other people find the episode. It tells other CAAs or prospective CAAs why they should listen, what's helpful about it. And it's also great for me to get a little bit of feedback just to hear how the episodes are landing for you all. So I'd really appreciate you guys taking the time to write those ratings and review. And if you've already done so, thank you so much. I do see those, and it really feels good to get some feedback from you. All right, till next time.